Five states go to the polls today, and once again, Americans will vote under completely different sets of rules. In Wisconsin, they have strict voter ID required, no exceptions at the door. In Minnesota, it also has primaries today. Most registered voters show nothing. Connecticut, they'll be asking for ID, but a photo is not required. A social security card or utility bill with your name on it can do the job. Vermont, also heading to the polls, and all you have to do there is just state your name. That's usually enough. Alabama, certain U.S. House districts are up in primaries, and they require voter ID, with a free state-issued photo ID available if you don't have one. Same country, same election day, wildly different standards for proving who you are. And that kind of patchwork makes some people wonder, would a single, clear national standard actually increase confidence in those results? Or is the current system working exactly as designed? Congress is in recess until September, but the fight over federal election rules isn't taking a break. Hardliners are publicly hammering Senate Republican leadership for refusing to bring up the Save America Act. That bill, as the Center Square's Therese Boudreau reports, would require voters to show valid ID in federal elections, demand proof of citizenship when registering to vote, require in-person registration for federal races, and it would force every state to scrub non-citizens from their voter rolls. Now, under the legislation, a driver's license alone wouldn't cut it for registration because non-citizens, they can legally obtain one in a lot of states. You'd need to have a birth certificate, passport, or other documents that can actually prove citizenship. Now, Senate Majority Leader John Thune's already said the votes aren't there. Republicans hold 53 seats. The bill needs 60. So math is math. But still, a vocal minority of Republicans demanding not only a vote, but a rewrite of the filibuster rules to force the measure through. President Donald Trump's repeatedly told leaders to make the Save America Act a priority, even if it means killing the filibuster. Opposition remains fierce. I spoke with Stephen Kauffman, he's founder of the Kauffman Legal Group, about the broader push for voter ID, including what's happening right now in the state of California. Election integrity is definitely a hot issue heading into the November 2026 midterm general election. And joining us to talk about some of the issues around election integrity is Stephen Kauffman. He is founder of the Kauffman Legal Group. Stephen, thanks for taking time with us here on The States. Let's jump right on into it. What are some of the crucial issues around this conversation of election integrity?
Well, it would be an understatement to say that the president has made an issue of election integrity heading into the 2026 election, and we're seeing efforts at both the federal level and at the state level to try and allegedly ensure more integrity in elections. My personal opinion is that these efforts are more of a voter suppression effort than a voting integrity effort. But they've certainly masked themselves under the guise of voter integrity.
Can you elaborate a bit on that? What are some of the issues you're saying could lead to voter suppression that is being pushed for by the White House?
Well, the SAVE Act, which has been passed by the House but is now sitting in the Senate, requires citizens it requires people who are trying to vote to provide documentary proof of their citizenship, and it's not just a driver's license requirement. You have to, when registering to vote, provide a passport, a birth certificate, or some other document that actually provides evidence of citizenship. And frankly, that's not something that everyone necessarily has at their fingertips. As you know, there have been many efforts nationwide, both at the federal, state, and local levels, to try and increase and enhance voter registration, make it easier for people to register. And these requirements are simply an obstacle and impediment to people being able to register to vote.
Is it just the idea of having to get those documents? Because the real ID, doesn't that require you to have these types of documents to be able to get that particular form of identification?
The SAVE Act doesn't actually provide for the real ID. It provides for documents that are acceptable when applying for a real ID, but uh, many people do not have passports. It may be hard for some of us to believe, but there are many people that don't have passports. Many people don't have access to their birth certificates, and it's not a particularly easy thing for people to be able to gather or provide this information when trying to register to vote, particularly given that many people are able to register online now and do it in ways that government has tried to make it easier for people to register to vote. And now we have these newfound obstacles that actually are prohibitive.
What do you say to those who point to New Jersey, which recently just found around 6,600 non-citizens ended up being registered to vote because of some of these, procedures you're laying out, like auto voter registration? If anybody interacts with a government agency, they could automatically get registered to vote if they remember to click a certain button that says that they are or are not a citizen.
Well, I mean, I think the important thing to remember is this was discovered and it was dealt with. I think it's a misnomer to say that there's fraud in our elections. I've been practicing in this area for 30 years now. And while there might be an occasional isolated incident where an individual is trying to forge signatures and there's a dozen or a couple dozen signatures on ballots that could potentially be fraudulent, I have never seen the type of widespread fraud that's being alleged to have occurred on a national level. And frankly, my experience with election officials, both in California and around the country, is that they are very much committed to election integrity, having fair and accurate elections. And these people are doing a very, very difficult job, some of them on shoestring budgets, to try and make sure that our elections are run fairly. And, I think that these allegations of voter fraud are convenient ways to dismiss decisions that are made by voters that people aren't happy with and provide a convenient way of justifying the results.
And we'll see what happens with the Save America Act, and if Congress does get that across the finish line, of course, in the Senate. It's interesting to see how that plays out. But that would only impact federal elections. You're in California, and there seems to be a measure that's going to be in front of voters coming up in November that deals with voter ID. Tell us your understanding of the status of that question.
Yeah, that is correct. There is a ballot measure that's qualified for the ballot in November, Proposition 39. It is being promoted again as sort of an election integrity measure. Unlike the SAVE Act, which deals with voter registration, this particular measure actually deals with voting and requires people who are voting in person to provide their identification each time they show up to vote in person. It's not just a one-time thing.
Yeah, not just with registration, but when they actually go to the voting booth to grab their ballot.
That's correct. Unlike the SAVE Act, it does permit for driver's license, for example, but it does require people to have identification when they show up at the polls, which is not required in California right now, and also requires people who vote by mail, which has become the more prevalent way to cast ballots over the last few cycles, to actually include on their on their ballot envelopes the last four digits of either their social security number, their driver's license number, exposing those numbers on the outside of an envelope in the mails to election officials, which is a extreme, perilous invasion of privacy. And would really kind of upset the way we conduct elections in California. And there's literally litigation happening as we speak over ballot language that's going to be presented to the voters this fall on that measure.
It'd be interesting to see the outcome of that, and then also if this question ultimately does get on the ballot and how it's asked and what the outcome is in November. But Stephen, if you could just elaborate a bit on why there is so much pushback about ensuring that somebody is a citizen in order to register to vote, or as the president has said, limiting mail-in voting, which studies in the past have shown it could increase the possibility of fraudulent votes. Why is there so much pushback against these things?
Again, I think this is really just an effort to dissuade people from voting and intimidate people into not voting, people who think they may be subject to scrutiny if they have to show up with ID. The government has threatened to and has sent Department of Justice personnel into different jurisdictions to sort of oversee the elections that are taking place. And I think it's, again, I think it's an intimidation and suppression tactic that is being used as a weapon. Vote by mail ballots, which as a result of COVID, frankly, were made easier to cast by people around the country. It used to be when I started practicing in a lot of states, you had to show a reason to request a vote by mail ballot, but states have eased the opportunity, and actually we've seen increases in voter participation as a result of that. It used to be that the Republicans were the masters of vote by mail balloting, and we would typically see that those ballots skewed Republican. But in the last few election cycles where it's become a more prevalent way of voting, those trends have sort of shifted. And it's only as those trends have shifted that we've seen this backlash against vote by mail balloting, which frankly, we should be spending our time trying to encourage people to vote and make it easier for people to vote. And vote by mail balloting is the perfect example of that, how that system works.
But shouldn't that also be something that's, you're putting safeguards in place to make sure that there isn't potential for fraud? Because I would imagine if there are questions, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, a Libertarian, Green, Socialist, whatever the question may be, if you've got concerns about the integrity of the election, I mean, that's going to dilute confidence in the election process.
Yeah, sure. There should be absolute integrity in the process, and I think that we have those guardrails in place. People have to certify under penalty of perjury that they are citizens. They have to file papers with the government, and they have to certify every time they vote. So I think that the appropriate guardrails are in place. Government agencies do, review paperwork, and if they identify people who are not citizens, then they will remove them from the rolls. But we haven't had any record of widespread voter fraud where, other than an occasional individual who may not be registered or may not be properly registered, is identified. There haven't been any reported cases of widespread activity where non-citizens collectively are somehow registering to vote and being able to cast their ballots.
Yeah, and the widespread versus, I mean, there have been instances of fraud in some, isolated jurisdictions, not widespread per se. But talk about the importance of having that decentralized system of voting, right? I mean, it's not just, the separation of federal elections from state elections, but even within states, like I'm in Illinois, each county, each of the 102 counties have their own election process on election day, really decentralizing things. Why is that so important?
Well, it's important for a state like yours and a state like mine, where you have such sort of a diverse population, right? We have coastal cities here with large populations, and then we have rural populations in other parts of the state, and folks that run elections in some of the more rural areas find that it's a very different way of voting than some of the more urban areas where vote by mail may be more popular. In some rural areas, it's a long trip for people to get to polling places. They may want to vote by mail, and in other places, they may prefer sort of the more quaint voting in person, going down to the school and casting your ballot. So, I mean, a lot of it really depends on the local jurisdiction, but the states have certain standards that have to be maintained throughout those jurisdictions. And even, there are certain federal, if not requirements, in order to get federal funding, there are certain mandates that people have to follow in order to be able to implement their voting machinery, their voting equipment, and their method of voting.
Well, you've been watching this stuff play out and been involved in the legal aspects of this for the past 30 years, so greatly appreciate you taking the time with us here today. Stephen Kauffman, founder of Kauffman Legal Group. Greatly appreciate you joining us here for the States.